So my name is Jordan. My SYP is on a book called Infinite Jest, which is by an author named David Foster Wallace. It really started about this time last year when I started reading Infinite Jest for the first time. And I'm a pretty quick reader, but Infinite Jest took me about 4 months to read, from about April or May to July. And so for me that was like a really long time, even for a book of this length, which is like 1,100 pages. But I felt when I finished reading the book that it was very important, just the messages within it, and also the whole structure of the book was very interesting and probably involved more elements of philosophy and complicated ideas than any other book I'd ever read. So I really wanted to explore those ideas further. So that's what I did with my SYP. So this is a chart kind of describing or trying to visualize the elements of the book. And each little name is hard to see is actually a character within the book, and each line is a connection between characters. I didn't make this, I found it on the internet. But I like it because it shows the complexity of the book. Because, in a 1,100 page book, you have tons of characters, you have tons of different storylines, and they're like converging and moving apart from each other all the time. And so I think this chart gives a good idea of how complex and deep the book is, just on a plot level. So Infinite Jest is David Foster Wallace's magnum opus. It was published in 1996. I'll give a fairly brief synopsis of it. Try not to spoil, but no promises. So there's two main protagonists whose journeys kind of mirror each other. There's one whose name is Hal Incandenza, and he's a teenager our age, 17 years old. He's in the Enfield Tennis Academy, which is a high school for gifted tennis prodigies. And Hal is the second best tennis player at his school and the fourth best on the continent, or on the North American continent. So he's incredibly gifted. He's a perfectionist, and he's roaring towards probably getting a 2400 on his SAT. Blah 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 blah. Life is going really well for him, but he's also addicted to marijuana and smokes it every day. And he's deeply horrified at kind of the person he is, because he feels quote like deep down inside there's nothing at all inside him. And life to him has really become a series of rarefied equations. Terms like joie de vivre or whatever become just variables that he manipulates to try and make people happy. So while it seems like externally he's got everything together, he's perfect, internally Hal's life is a mess. The other character, the other protagonist in Infinite Jest is Don Gately, who's a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. And for Don Gately's life is almost the exact reverse of Hal's. If Hal is good at tennis because he plays it like chess, Don Gately was good at football in high school because he had a really large head that he just slammed into people. But Don Gately's story is the redemptive part of Infinite Jest. At the chronological end of Infinite Jest, Hal Incandenza's life has really kind of devolved into nothingness. He's completely unable to communicate with the outside world. When he tries to talk about complex ideas, either regarding philosophy or regarding himself and his own emotions, it comes out gobbled, and people think he's having a stroke. But Don Gately, on the other hand, when we last see him chronologically, he's really freed himself from addiction. And he's decided that every moment of life is endurable, and he really feels like he's making real choices. The main plot of the book actually seems like it has very little to do with either of these characters. It's mainly about a Quebecois terror plot to bring down the United States by circulating a movie so addicting that if you see it once, you get addicted to it, and you watch it, and then you die of starvation. And that's the thrust of the book, and how Gately are really observers watching this crazy show go on. So reading the book was part one of my project. Part two was trying to understand it by learning about the philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who I'll call Wittgenstein because I can't say that word. Ludwig was called Uncle Louis by David Foster Wallace, and was his favorite philosopher. And his ideas really influenced David Foster Wallace and Infinite Jest. So what's interesting about Wittgenstein is that he had two main philosophies, his early philosophy and his late philosophy, and they really directly contradicted each other. His early philosophy, which he expressed in the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, was really about language as a cage, or language is a series of logical propositions that have to make almost mathematical sense, or else they're nonsense. So every sentence I say has to make a comparison to reality, and if that comparison is true, then the sentence is true, and if it's false, then the sentence is false. But if we can't say whether it's true or false, the sentence is nonsense and just can't be said. This early Wittgenstein thought that philosophical problems arose only when we made propositions that couldn't be tested against reality. So in other words, if it can't be scientifically proven or disproven, it's nonsense, don't talk about it. This philosophy is really seen in how. So for how, life becomes, I have to manipulate all these equations and make people happy, and I can do that through my language too. Morality is something I don't understand. I can't compare it to reality, so I don't really have a moral system. My moral system is just trying to be the best person I can be, trying to be a perfect image of myself. Lately, Wittgenstein completely contradicted himself, and the story of why he actually went back is kind of a funny one. He believed that the only propositions that had sense were ones that could be compared against reality, until one day, someone in England, a bike rider, flipped him off. And he thought, okay, there's meaning in that guy's middle finger, but he's not making any comparisons to reality. There's certainly no logical form in his middle finger. What does this mean? So this caused him to rethink his entire life work, and he came up with a new philosophy, which he expressed in the 1950s in his philosophical investigations. And this philosophy is really about language as arising from our sense of human community. And so language, for late Wittgenstein, is more about, implicit meanings and human interactions. Our words aren't defined by what they reference to, but how they're used. So if I say the word book in this context, you guys all think, if I say infinite jest in this context, like this book, you think of this book. Whereas if in a different context, if I was holding a dictionary and said book, you would think of a dictionary. So our words are defined by their use, not by, comparing themselves to some distant reference, some other world. So this type of language, also the rules are implicit. They're not something that can be learned or mastered. And for Howe, that would be very disturbing, because for Howe, language is something, it's just a tool he uses, and it's a tool that must be mastered. But this was also the type of language that Don Gately believed in and uses within the book. Because for Don Gately, words changed different contexts to find different meanings, and it was okay to not, be totally correct with your usage of language all the time. Slang and other things are allowed to be used under this type of language. Whereas with early Wittgenstein, we really couldn't do that. And finally, I kind of worked towards a main thesis, and it really has to do with this David Foster Wallace quote, which is, today's sub-40s have very different horrors, prominent among which are enemy and solipsism, and a purely American loneliness, the prospect of dying without once having loved something more than yourself. And so for Howe, the main tragedy is that he's slipping into himself throughout the plot of Infinite Jest. He's not really outwardly there at all. He feels that he's not even a real human being. He feels more like a robot who's just doing things because there's like a scientifically perfected way to do things. And so what Infinite Jest does is it kind of demonstrates how Howe's drive towards his perfectionism alienates him from the rest of society. Because when we become really worried about not being like the perfect human being, we distance ourselves from other people. I don't want to show you who I really am out of fear of not being perfect myself. So we use different tools to distance ourselves. Irony, and for Howe, drugs, because if you're happy because of marijuana, you don't need to be happy because of human interactions. So Howe distanced himself from other people, and eventually he's literally unable to talk because of this. He's kind of stuck in what Wallace references in his This Is Water speech, is a rat race, towards inner perfectionism while just entirely sacrificing the outside world and really your interactions with other people. But Don Gately's journey kind of shows us the way out of this trap, because for Don Gately, language is something that you use to express your experiences and your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations, not something you just use to impress others by manipulating variables. And so this being genuine and open, while scary and terrifying, also actually lets Don Gately be happy and eventually free. So Don Gately eventually overcomes his addiction because he realizes that each single moment, when you just view them as they are coming, as you are in them, instead of viewing them far in the future, are totally endurable. Things become unendurable only when you view them as, from the future. Like if your mind jumps over the wall and looks down the road. So a good example of this is actually reading Infinite Jest, because reading Infinite Jest sucks. It's like an 1,100-page book, and you read 300 pages, and it's really dense, difficult to understand writing, and you just want to give up and quit. You only read Infinite Jest if you're in the moment and you're actually viewing it page by page. When you view Infinite Jest as this 1,100 pages, you would never read it. Nothing would ever get done. So Infinite Jest actually operates in this way. It forces us to live in the present. It forces us to view each moment as itself instead of a big collection of them. And in so doing, forces us to integrate ourselves in a human community, because you're using language when you're reading Infinite Jest. You're going from character to character in this huge plot. And all of that forces us to move away from addiction, move towards just interacting with people in a real way, and move away from irony and separating ourselves from other people. So that's my SYP.